The soda can hit the pavement with a dull thud, splashing sticky liquid across the tomb guard's polished combat boots. The crowded Arlington froze, their gasps cutting through the summer heat. Chad Vanderbilt, a 16-year-old in limited edition sneakers, grinned, his phone already recording for the perfect viral clip. He expected a reaction, maybe a flinch, a scowl from the stone-faced soldier. But Sergeant Marcus Thorne didn't move. His eyes, hidden behind sunglasses, burned with a fury no one saw coming. In that moment, a single act of disrespect was about to spark a firestorm that would change a boy, a family, and a nation's understanding of honor. What Chad didn't know, what no one in that crowd could have guessed, was that the man he mocked carried the weight of a fallen brother, and the tomb he guarded held secrets that would soon unravel everything. It was Memorial Day at Arlington National Cemetery. The sun blazed down on a sea of visitors gathered around the tomb of the unknown soldier. The air was thick with heat and reverence, the kind of quiet that settles over a crowd when something sacred is about to happen. Families, veterans, and tourists stood shoulder to shoulder, their eyes fixed on the lone sentinel, pacing with mechanical precision. His navy blue uniform was crisp, his garrison cap sat low, and his sunglasses hid any hint of emotion. Every step, every turn, every click of his heels echoed with purpose. This was Marcus Thorne, a 28-year-old tomb guard, a member of the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, and a man who carried the weight of honor on his shoulders. Among the crowd was the Vanderbilt family from Connecticut. Richard Vanderbilt, a Wall Street tycoon, was dressed in a tailored suit, his eyes glued to his phone as he orchestrated his empire. His wife, Eleanor, was examining her reflection in a small, gold-plated mirror, touching up her makeup as if preparing for a gala instead of a solemn ceremony. Between them stood their 16-year-old son, Chad. His blonde hair was gelled to perfection, his outfit screaming money designer sneakers, a custom t-shirt, and the latest smartphone. Chad wasn't here for the ceremony. He was here because his parents thought a cultural trip to D.C. would look good in their socialite circles. But to Chad, this was just another boring stop on a vacation he didn't want. "This is so lame," Chad muttered loud enough for nearby tourists to glance over. "Why are we standing here watching some guy walk back and forth? It's like 100 degrees out here."
"Chad, darling,"
Eleanor sighed, barely looking up from her mirror.
"just try to enjoy it. This is important."
"Important?" Chad scoffed, scrolling through his phone. "It's just some old tomb. I bet this guy's just a wannabe soldier playing dress-up." Richard didn't even look up from his screen. Let him complain. Eleanor, he'll get over it. The crowd hushed as Marcus completed his 21 steps, turned, and faced the tomb. His movements were flawless, a living tribute to the unknown soldiers who gave everything. Marcus had earned this post through years of grueling training, driven by the memory of his foster brother, Michael, who never came home from Iraq. Every step he took was for Michael, for the fallen, for the country. But Chad didn't see that. All he saw was a chance to go viral. "I'm gonna get a sick video of this guy," Chad said, raising his phone. "Bet I can make him flinch." He started recording, narrating loudly. "Yo, check out this robot soldier. Bet he's sweating buckets under that hat." A few tourists shot Chad dirty looks, but he didn't care. He was used to getting attention, used to his parents smoothing over any trouble he caused. Back home, teachers let him slide, and his friends worshipped his family's wealth. To Chad, the world was his playground, and rules didn't apply. As Marcus turned for another pass, Chad's boredom turned to mischief. He spotted a half-empty soda can in his hand. A grin spread across his face. "Yo, this is gonna be epic," he whispered to himself. He stepped closer to the rope barrier. ignoring the signs that read, "Silence and respect." The crowd murmured, sensing trouble. But Richard and Eleanor were too distracted to notice. With a quick flick of his wrist, Chad tossed the soda can. It hit the ground near Marcus's feet, splashing sticky liquid onto his polished boots. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that broke the silence. Marcus didn't flinch. His face remained stone, his steps unbroken, but his jaw tightened ever so slightly. Years of discipline held him steady. He'd faced worse than a spoiled kid, but this was a different kind of insult. Chad laughed louder now, egged on by the crowd's reaction. "Yo, he didn't even blink. This guy's a total statue." He raised his phone again, zooming in on Marcus's boots. "Check out the mess I made. This is going viral." Just then, Chad's attention shifted. He noticed Amara Washington and her grandmother, Sarah, standing nearby, watching him with expressions of shock and disgust. Amara was clutching an old film camera, her eyes blazing with indignation. Chad smirked. A new target presented itself. "What are you looking at?" Chad sneered, turning to Amara. "Never seen someone have a little fun before." Sarah placed a hand on her granddaughter's shoulder, her voice firm. "Young man, what you did was a disgrace." Chad let out a cruel laugh. "Oh, a disgrace, ma'am? Or are you just jealous you can't afford a soda? Maybe if you make a scene, my father will throw you a few dollars." He looked from Amara to Sarah, his eyes dripping with condescension. "You people are all the same." "You people—" Amara stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "What do you mean by that?" "Oh, you know," Chad said, his voice a mocking drawl. "Always looking for a handout, playing the victim. Is that old camera the only thing you own, let me guess? You're hoping to snap a few pictures and sell them to some tabloid for pocket change." His venomous words hung in the air, heavy and wrong. Amara was stunned into silence, her face paling at the insult. Richard Vanderbilt finally looked up from his phone, not to reprimand his son, but to reinforce his arrogance. "Chad, don't waste your time with them," he said, his voice cold as ice. "If they keep bothering you, we'll have security remove them. They look suspicious." The phrase, "they look suspicious," was a dagger aimed at Amara and her grandmother. It wasn't just a personal insult. It was an accusation rooted in the color of their skin. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Phones were now pointed not at the soldier, but at the escalating confrontation. Marcus's eyes, hidden behind his sunglasses, locked onto the scene for a split second. He'd heard worse insults in combat zones, but the casual cruelty of the boy, the coded racism of the father, stirred a deeper, more profound rage. The tomb of the unknown soldier wasn't just a monument. It was a shrine to sacrifice, to men and women who gave their lives without fame or fortune. And now, this hallowed ground was being desecrated by a vile display of privilege and prejudice. Chad, undeterred, strode toward Amara. "Let me see that camera," he demanded, reaching for it. "Let's see what kind of cheap junk this is." "Don't touch it," Amara recoiled, clutching the camera to her chest. "It was my grandfather's—" "Your grandfather?" Chad sneered. "I'm sure he was just like you. Come on, let me see it. Or are you afraid I'll break it?" That was the line. Training screamed at Marcus to stay still, to ignore the provocation. But something snapped. This wasn't just about him anymore, not just about the tomb. It was about Michael. It was about every soldier who fell. And it was about that girl, a citizen being humiliated on the nation's most sacred soil, simply for the color of her skin. In one fluid motion, faster than anyone expected, Sergeant Marcus Thorne broke formation. He moved with the lethal grace of a striking cobra. In 2 long strides, he closed the distance, not toward Chad, but toward the source of his arrogance. Marcus didn't lay a hand on the boy. Instead, his gloved hand shot out and snatched the smartphone from Chad's grasp. Chad's jaw dropped, his sneer dissolving into a mask of pure shock. Before he could utter a word, Marcus dropped the phone onto the hard pavement. He didn't just drop it. He brought his combat boot down upon it with a single, decisive stomp. The crack of reinforced glass and microcircuitry echoed like a gunshot in the stunned silence. The crowd froze, then it erupted. You broke my phone!" Chad shrieked, his voice cracking. "That's a $3,000 phone. You're going to pay for that. I'll have your job." Marcus Thorne turned, his face an unreadable mask of military discipline, and returned to his post as if nothing had happened. He resumed his 21-step march, his posture perfect. But the air around the tomb had changed. It was electric, charged with tension and the buzzing of 100 hushed, frantic whispers. Some people were cheering quietly. Others were simply stunned. Phones that had been recording Chad's antics were now pointed squarely at the shattered remains of his device and the imposing figure of the soldier. Security guards, led by Inspector Laura Bennett, were already pushing through the crowd. Laura, a no-nonsense officer with 15 years at Arlington, spoke into her radio. "We have a situation at the tomb. A guard has engaged a civilian. Repeat, the sentinel has responded." Richard Vanderbilt stormed forward, his face a thunderous shade of red. "This is an outrage. That soldier assaulted my son. I'm calling my lawyer. I'll have him court-martialed. Do you know who I am?" Laura raised a hand, her voice calm but firm as steel. "Sir, I know exactly what happened. Your son threw a soda can at a federal officer on duty, verbally harassed a young woman and her grandmother, and then attempted to physically take her property. He's lucky all that got broken was his phone." "He's a kid," Eleanor shrieked, clutching her husband's arm. "You can't treat him like a criminal." "Ma'am," Laura said, her eyes cold, "age is not an excuse for what he did or what you allowed him to do. This is a sacred place. Your son defiled it, and you stood by and watched." Chad, still staring at his shattered phone, finally looked around. For the first time, he noticed the faces in the crowd were not admiring, but filled with anger, disgust, and disappointment. A group of veterans stood nearby, their arms crossed, their eyes hard as flint. One of them, a man in a wheelchair wearing a Vietnam vet cap, shook his head. That kid got exactly what he deserved. The story was already exploding online. Clips of Chad's taunts and Marcus's swift response were spreading across every social media platform. News vans were being rerouted to Arlington. The narrative was shifting from entitled teen to something far more toxic, with users pointing out the clear racial undertones of the confrontation. "Escort the family to the security office," Laura commanded her team. "Now!" Richard protested, but the guards were firm, creating a perimeter around the Vanderbilts and leading them away. As they were marched through the parting crowd, some people snapped photos, while others muttered about spoiled rich kids and the poison of prejudice. Back at his post, Marcus resumed his march. His boots were still stained with soda, but his focus was unbreakable. Inside, however, a storm was raging. He had broken protocol, a cardinal sin for a tomb guard. But as he glanced toward Amara, who was being gently comforted by her grandmother, he felt no regret. Not yet. In the small, air-conditioned security office, the Vanderbilts sat across from Laura and a woman who commanded instant respect. Colonel Margaret Hayes, the commanding officer of the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, was a 50-year-old veteran with silver hair and a gaze that could cut glass. She didn't mince words. "Mr. Vanderbilt," she began, her voice low and dangerous. "Your son committed multiple offenses on federal property today. assault on a federal officer, harassment, and what several witnesses are describing as racially motivated verbal abuse. This isn't a game. Richard leaned forward, his businessman instincts kicking in. Look, Colonel, this is all a misunderstanding. The boy was hot. He was bored. I'm prepared to make a generous donation to the Cemetery Foundation. We can make this all go away quietly. Margaret's eyes narrowed.
This isn't about money. Mr. Vanderbilt, it's about honor. It's about respect. Your son has none, and frankly, I'm beginning to see why. Actions have consequences, no matter how much money you have.
He's only 16. You're blowing this out of proportion, Eleanor cried. Just then, Richard's phone buzzed. It was his PR chief. His face went from red to ghostly white. He put the phone on speaker. Richard, it's a catastrophe. A frantic voice said, the video is everywhere. They're calling Chad the Arlington assailant. The board members are calling. The media, a major investor, a pension fund, just pulled out. They cited the company's lack of social responsibility. This is a multi-million-dollar disaster. Richard slammed the phone down, his composure finally cracking. He pointed a trembling finger at Colonel Hayes. This is your fault. Your soldier started this. I want him arrested. My soldier, the colonel said, standing up, defended the honor of this tomb and the dignity of a citizen your son was tormenting. But you want to talk about arrests? Fine. She turned to Laura. Inspector, please have Sergeant Thorne escorted here, and bring in the young woman and her grandmother. They are the victims of a crime. A few minutes later, Marcus entered the room, now in his standard army fatigues, his presence still commanding. He stood at attention, his face impassive. Amara and Sarah followed, looking nervous but resolute. Sergeant Thorne, the colonel said, please state for the record what you witnessed. In a clear, steady voice, Marcus recounted everything: the soda can, the taunts at him, and then the escalating verbal attack on Amara and Sarah, including Chad's exact words and Richard Vanderbilt's "they look suspicious" comment. Richard jumped to his feet. It's his word against ours. He's a disgruntled soldier. You're a meddling bureaucrat. And they, he gestured dismissively at Amara and Sarah, are just looking for a payday. Is that so? Colonel Hayes said, a faint, chilling smile on her lips. She nodded to an officer in the corner, who turned on a large monitor on the wall. You see, Mr. Vanderbilt, this is Arlington. We have cameras. Excellent ones. The screen flickered to life, showing a crystal-clear, high-angle view of the entire incident. It captured everything: the soda can, Chad's sneering face, his aggressive posture toward Amara, his hand reaching for her camera, and most damningly, the audio picked up his every word, his every slur. Then it showed Richard Vanderbilt, not intervening, but endorsing his son's behavior. The room fell silent. Eleanor Vanderbilt let out a small, horrified gasp. Chad slumped in his chair, his face ashen. The bravado was gone, replaced by the dawning terror of consequence. Richard stared at the screen, his mouth agape, watching his carefully constructed world of power and privilege burn down in high definition. So, Mr. Vanderbilt, Colonel Hayes said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. You were saying something about it being his word against ours. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner and Richard Vanderbilt's ragged breathing. The video playback had stripped him of every defense, every ounce of his blustering authority. He was no longer a titan of industry. He was just a man, exposed and disgraced on a 50-inch screen. Colonel Hayes turned the monitor off. The evidence is irrefutable, she stated, her voice leaving no room for argument. You have two options, Mr. Vanderbilt. Option 1. We hand this footage over to the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Your son will be charged with assault and harassment. You, sir, will face charges for making a false report and potentially for contributing to a hate crime. Given your public profile, this will be a national spectacle. Your company, your reputation, it will all be gone." She let the weight of her words sink in before continuing. "Or there is option 2? Richard, looking defeated for the first time in his life, slowly raised his head. "What is option 2? "Option 2 is about restorative justice," the colonel said, her gaze shifting to Amara and Sarah. "It's about making amends, not with money, but with action." She laid out the terms, her voice as precise as a surgeon's scalpel. Chad would be enrolled in a mandatory 100-hour community service program under the direct supervision of Arlington's grounds crew, composed mostly of veterans. He would work, he would sweat, and he would learn. Furthermore, the Vanderbilt Family Foundation would be required to fund a new, permanent scholarship program for underprivileged students wishing to pursue history and photography, administered by an independent board, the first recipient of which would be Amara Washington, along with a grant for new equipment. But the final condition was the most brutal. "And you, Mr. Vanderbilt," the colonel said, looking directly at him, "you will issue a public, unreserved apology, not through a PR firm. You will stand in front of the cameras yourself. You will apologize to Sergeant Thorne for disrespecting his uniform. You will apologize to Amara and her grandmother for your family's reprehensible behavior. And you will apologize to this nation for desecrating this sacred ground." Eleanor began to sob quietly. Chad stared at the floor, the full weight of his actions finally crashing down on him. Richard looked at the colonel, then at his son, and then at the door, as if weighing his chances of escape. But there was no escape. "We accept," he finally choked out, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Over the next month, the world watched the fallout. Chad Vanderbilt, stripped of his designer clothes and phone, was seen daily at Arlington, hauling bags of mulch and cleaning headstones under the watchful eye of grizzled veterans who offered no sympathy. The Vanderbilt Scholarship for Honor and Vision was announced, making headlines. But the most watched event was the press conference. Richard Vanderbilt, looking tired and humbled, stood at a podium and delivered the most difficult speech of his life. He admitted his and his son's failings without reservation. He apologized, his voice cracking, to a stoic Sergeant Thorne and a dignified Amara Washington who stood beside her grandmother, watching. For Amara, justice was more than just the apology. It was the scholarship, the new camera, and the sudden national recognition of her talent. Her photos from that day raw, powerful images that captured both the disgrace and the quiet dignity of the moment were featured in a major magazine. She had found her voice, not by selling to tabloids, but by telling the truth through her lens. Sergeant Marcus Thorne continued his duty at the tomb. His steps were just as precise, his uniform just as immaculate. But sometimes, as he completed his 21 steps, he would allow himself a brief, almost imperceptible glance towards the section of the cemetery where his foster brother, Michael, was buried. He had not only defended the tomb, he had defended Michael's legacy. He had defended the idea that in America, honor and respect were not for sale, and that they belonged to everyone, regardless of the color of their skin or the size of their bank account. The spoiled boy had been punished, the arrogant father had been humbled, and a young woman's future had been ignited. On that hot summer day, justice had been served not with a gavel, but with the stomp of a combat boot and the unblinking gaze of a guardian. Thank you for following this story. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. If you'd like more inspiring stories about justice and resilience, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We'll be back tomorrow with another must-see story you won't want to miss.